You're the first person to beat me into the room. That is awesome.
Oh yeah.
Usually I'm waiting for a while.
Yeah, likewise. I'm normally like, come on, like press the button.
It was like he's in the room. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, I wasn't ready for that. I was turning this on silent. How you doing, man? Thank you so much for sitting down to do this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It actually worked out on a good day. It's like obviously it's like a lot of media and stuff that we got going on today. So from my side, I'm actually not involved in it at all. So it's actually a perfect day for it. So it's good.
Awesome. And yeah, this is really so these things kind of, I don't know if Alex, when he had reached out and put us together, kind of explained how these came about, of more so than just talking to athletes or people in cycling and being like, hey, tell me about how amazing you are. We really started this small coaching company based off of a couple blogs. I had somebody that was talking about their chronic training load and they were getting ready for a race and it was going down. So now they're like losing fitness. So I'm like, hey, let's, I want to like put out some content, and everything that we try to post is like, how can this be applied to mostly amateurs that are watching this? There's just so much information out there now. And I think it's gonna be really interesting just to hear kind of how you see a whole different side of the sport. But you've obviously interacted with a ton of amateurs, and
Yeah.
just being able to share some of the knowledge will be extremely beneficial for a ton of people. So
Cool.
thank
Sorry.
you. No, it's all
Trying
good.
to turn on a light here a bit. There we go.
Um, so I guess first off, you could introduce yourself to everybody, and I usually like to let people do the intro as opposed to me picking how I should describe them.
Sure. Yeah, I don't really have much of an intro, to be honest. John Wakefield, 43 years old, originally from Cape Town, South Africa. Currently live in Girona, Spain, where our South African company, we've actually just opened up a testing and biomechanics laboratory, same to what we have in South Africa. Yeah, I work for a company. When I say work, it's four of us are shareholders for a high performance cycling and triathlon, mountain bike testing, coaching. We do a lot of research, biomechanics within the company. Four of us are directors. We have another, I think, 7 associate coaches. On our books in general, you're looking at about just on 300 athletes across the board for all of us, sort of spread out to kind of a little bit around the world. And additionally to that, I work as a coach, performance coordinator, and moonlight as an assistant sporting director for UAE Team Emirates.
Awesome. So, well,
Yeah.
that was actually me. One of my first questions was if you were still currently involved with amateurs. So definitely, it sounds
Yeah,
like you guys have a
definitely.
awesome. What's your background in cycling? How did you find the bicycle?
I raced motocross since I was a kid, and I had 2 years of pretty bad injuries. And part of my rehabilitation process, when I broke my back and broke a leg, I couldn't run. So the gentleman that was doing my rehab, who I absolutely hated, but he was very good at his job. He was an ex Olympic cyclist, and he said to me, "Hey, like let's get you onto a bicycle, and we can start, kind of accelerating your rehabilitation." And it just bit. That was it. I was like, "This is awesome."
That's awesome.
Sucks. I was really bad, but the bug had bit, and that's kind of where it progressed from there. Yeah.
So did you fall? So was it through the rehab? Did you kind of fall in love with the training side of cycling before? Like sometimes, you hear people that have just been riding all the time and then they're like, oh, I want to go do these bike races. So I have to train. Do you feel like maybe you fell in love with the training side first? Because it was more like do these to be able to get your body back to
Yeah.
functioning?
Yeah, like even when I raced motocross, like I enjoyed Monday to Friday a lot better than actually going to the races, believe it or not. Like I enjoyed practice, I enjoyed training, I enjoyed that whole element of it. Where the racing was good, don't get me wrong, but like I really enjoyed that side of it. And then when I was pretty beat up after some serious accidents, and just seeing what this guy had done with me to get me back to where I needed to be, I fell kind of completely in love with the whole kind of training aspect. And actually, that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to kind of be him. Although, as I said, I really despised him during our 3 years of rehab. But yeah, that's like essentially that's what I wanted. I wanted to do what he did. And that's kind of how I landed up a little bit where I am now.
That's cool. I always tell people I'm more cyclist than bike racer. Like if I couldn't, I had an injury to my foot at one point. It's a broken sesamoid bone, and the guy
Yeah.
was, I was talking to him. I'm like, listen, man, I don't care if I can never go to a race again. I'll be really crushed if I could ride like 90 minutes and then it was just brutally horrible pain. I'd be on the side of the road. I'm like, if I can only ride 90 minutes, like I'm gonna be disappointed. Like,
Mm.
life happens. But anyways, I'm
Sure.
glad that worked itself out.
Yeah.
So kind of jumping into some things, one of the biggest questions that a lot of people, it comes up in like chatting amongst athletes, and we read these articles and stuff. When you have pros that they're riding a ton, and you're coming in, and I had listened to another interview that you did like before you got the job, I think with UAE, and you got to go, you're talking to these world tour riders. How involved are they in their training calendar? And like, what type of value add do you try to bring to the table? I'm sure it varies athlete to athlete. How does that relationship sort of unfold?
Um, like I find it as kind of two ways. They either fully accept you and they follow your process, or they, well, I've been a pro for 100 years. I know what works. Like that's sort of the like kind of two ends of the scale of what I got. With someone that's sort of a little bit on that defensive side, I try slowly introduce stuff. So I'll be like, okay, we can follow your plan, but we're going to start adding in one or two new things like, blah, blah, blah. And eventually, touch wood that it's worked. They've kind of over time seen the light, and they have made changes, and they trust you essentially. Where the other guys have trusted you kind of fully, it's their job. They're super professional at what they do. And but you also find out from them what works. You say to them, like, what do you like? What are your go-to sessions? What do you like in a taper? And you build that in with what you want, and you sort of transition over. It was a bit daunting at first when I came over. It was more because you're from South Africa. It's like, and everyone tells you, it's like, what do you know about pro cycling? Like overseas is going on an hour boat trip to Robben Island. So yeah, it is a bit daunting. But for me personally, I must say that my transition was really good, and that sort of trust was there, and guys saw results. So from my side, touch wood, it was good. But awesome. It's not always the easiest, put it that way. Like I've had some difficult riders, don't get me wrong, like some super, super difficult ones. And it's just sort of like a process of like nurturing them, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. What do you think were there any trends from like, I don't know if we call it like the old regime, like the guys that have just been doing more old school stuff that you're like, wow, I see like everyone is into this. Maybe it was just big hours and only a couple days intensity, or only do endurance over these 3 months. Was there any like strands that you kept seeing over and over, or was everybody kind of on their own thing? Like, this is what I do, this is what I believe in, just I'm good.
Like you would find that what I found is that the Italians followed a very similar suit in terms of their training and their methodology, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Like maybe little bits and pieces here, but in general, that mold was very similar, even when you look at the coaches and stuff. So, is it wrong? No. There's some phenomenal Italian cyclists, but it is from that old school regime, in terms of what they did and how they did it. So it's not by any means wrong. It was just a very certain kind of methodology that was used, ingrained, if you want to call it that.
What are some details to that? Like, what is that?
Big hours.
Okay.
That's like one of them was huge hours.
30 plus.
Yeah, 30-hour weeks.
Wow.
It's big hours. In today's times, it's huge hours that no one does that really. So there was that, and they kind of had a lot of like medium intensity stuff, which was interesting to me. You know, they would kind of either have sort of like, you know, like a mid sort of tempo zone, and then they would have like 40/20s, you know, so it would kind of, it was very different. It was interesting to me because I did learn one or two things looking at it that I put into my own personal arsenal of stuff. But yeah, it was, yeah, it was just interesting in terms of what, of how things were done.
That's super interesting. And actually, I don't know if you know the name Stephen Bassett. He races in the US for Rally Pro Cycling. He's
Yes.
actually from Tennessee. So we've crossed paths. That exact workout was one of his favorites. And it's the tempo riding, which, you know, a couple years ago, everyone's like, tempo is no man's land. It doesn't do anything. A
Yeah.
lot of riders are talking, the guys that are going to Europe from the States, saying it's a lot of tempo. And then Stephen actually said, I'm doing 40/20s, 20/20s, et cetera. Really surprised me. And I'm not a huge like Tabata type guy because it never seemed, it's not necessarily as applicable to my own personal training, but I never felt like I got as much out of the sessions as opposed to like classic VO2 max. Like if I'm going hard, I wanted sustained longer efforts. And it was, he really more attributed to the style of racing in Europe. But it is more surprising that a lot of guys are focusing on this type of riding where they're accomplishing the work, putting out the kilojoules, and like, dude, I can do low threshold, if you want to call it sweet spot, for hours on end, and then do some really hard efforts. And that's kind of like this non exact interval, but that's their training. And it's surprising to hear that come back up from you.
Yeah. Like a lot of it, if you look at it, where there is a little bit of a crossover point or a skewed conception, is the difference between like tempo, which is sort of that like, if you have 5 zones or whatever, like a mid-high zone 3, you know, which is almost like a lactate steady state. But where that is missing, what we also do prescribe, you know, in terms of a training zone, if you want to call it that, is more in your like mitochondria value. So it's sort of like a zone 2 ride, but obviously just being at a different level in terms of watts per kilo to your average guy on the street. And what you kind of, you know, essentially doing here, is creating like type 1, like you're creating mitochondria, you are creating like type fast twitch fibers, or type 1, you are, you know, creating a where you're using fats as a fuel source, and you are utilizing lactate. So, you know, that's where a lot of times it's sort of tempo is misconstrued or confused, I think it's the right word, with regards to that. You know, so when people say tempo, like that's a bit higher than where you're trying to stimulate mitochondrial growth and function and improve your fat utilization. So, you know, as an athlete, essentially, you know, athletic performance, especially for endurance, is improved, or your performance is improved by fat utilization, where you preserve glycogen utilization throughout an entire competition or race. So that's a little bit confused a little bit with regards to tempo. It's actually like a little bit lower than that.
So if you were giving like a percentage, you're saying that most people are looking at it as like up to 90%, and you're saying they should look at it a little bit lower, like 80% FTP-ish?
Yeah, for like, if you want to, like, as an amateur, you know, when I say amateur, I'm talking
because
like
people are going to hear this and then be like, wait, how, so what am I supposed to do?
Yeah, sure. No, 100%. So, you know, you essentially, you need to test for this and to get the right values. However,
okay,
as an amateur, and when I say amateur, I mean like, you know, age group is Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3s, etc. Depending on where you are, if your values are right, you're probably looking at around 78 to 83% of threshold. However, the better you get, the more that line will move. So, you know, essentially it should come down lower. You know, you may start if it's at, I don't know, 3 watts a kilo, and, you know, like top level, you'd be looking at sort of 3.5, 4 around there. So yeah, it really depends on who you are. But it's not tempo. But because of the way you train it, it's people misconstrue it as tempo in its true word.
Yeah.
And tempo is a word that I don't use. Like for me, it's that gray area. It's a pointless training zone, personally.
So you don't, what zones do you have, like, I guess when you prescribe, you're giving like specific wattage prescriptions, or like, do you not even speak in like the classic zones like endurance, tempo, threshold, or
no, we do obviously. So like you do have that, but you know, my personal philosophy and the training model I use, you know, it's either it's that like hard or easy, so to speak. So from that side, like I've got I work off traditional 5 zones, 5 being obviously anaerobic, 4 being threshold, 3 it's there, and then zone 2 being your 1 and 2 is your recovery zone, and then sort of in between 2 and 3 is sort of that like mitochondrial training zone, which is what I explained.
Awesome. You brought up philosophy. What are a couple words to sort of describe how you coach? And if you wanted to get into it, you know, you talked methodology. It's actually a question that I'm in like some forums and just trying to help people answer questions. And a couple people have been like, what's your methodology? So I've been trying to put that together so I could easily just spit it back to people. What do you think are some high points that as a coach sort of give off how you help people get faster?
Sure. It's it's a good question.
Sorry to put you on the spot. Or we'll change it. We'll reframe the question as to like maybe what are 3 like so what I've been coming up with were like what's a pillar? What are things that people can always look to and say, if I focus on these, I will get better. And so I say consistency. I don't, because you know, there's, hey, I'm on a sweet spot plan. Hey, no, I'm polarized this week. Hey, like whatever you do, find what you're doing, consistently train. You know, vary up the stimulus, things like that. Like what are some, so maybe it's not coaching style or methodology. What are some 3 overarching concepts you think athletes could focus on to improve?
So my methodology is essentially your polarized training module, in theory. So for me, if you want to get better, like, and whether as you said, whether it's a polarized, whether it's a threshold based or a tempo based, or whatever you want to call it, is you need to stick with it and do it. A big problem I find with people is that they'll start off on a polarized model, and then before finishing like a proper mesocycle, they'll go to like a threshold one because they've read somewhere, they need to improve your FTP. And then they'll be improving FTP, and then they'll read, like I need neuromuscular pathway. So they'll stop halfway on that before there's any adaptation, and they'll try to locate and stuff. So, you know, like finish what you start, regardless of the outcome. So whatever you're training, so if you're on a threshold based program, you'll get the adaptation from that if you follow it, and then go do something else, you know, or do a proper periodized plan, but then follow like every mesocycle, go through, you know, like your base prep, your neuromuscular, your preparation phase, etc. Don't go like all over, because then you're just getting 30% of everything, and you nowhere. Like that's what I find. It's like a lot of times, like with age groupers and amateurs, which is great, is that they super eager and they super excited to train, but they live on Google, and the problem with that is that they have 5 people telling them 5 different things, and you just stagnate. Like you actually go nowhere.
They try to do all of them.
And they try to do all of them, and you go nowhere. It's like you putting in, if you want to get 100% out, put 100% in, but they're putting in 30% of everything. So you're only getting 30% out, and then they get upset when they don't improve.
And I think the expectation is also that I'm going to improve everything over the next 3 months. So then it's like,
Yeah.
they see a little bump in VO2 max or FTP, and then they go do this neuromuscular block you're talking about. And they're like, wait, now my FTP is down. I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you can't, it's not all going up at the same time. This is like
Yeah, correct.
twisting dials, and you got to balance. And like, then really just asking somebody, well, what is your goal? Why are you trying to get faster? Because you and Johnny down the street might be doing two totally different things. You shouldn't be like cross-pollinating your plans of this is what I need to be doing.
Yeah, like a really good example is I've been coaching a guy for an amateur, like here, or not here, but back in South Africa. A really good guy, like great guy, great athlete, fully committed. But primarily he's a sprinter, but he can get over sort of smaller rollers, like 5-minute, 10-minute climbs. And there was a tour coming up, and he wanted to focus on his climbing, and that's because he thought if he could get rid of the other climbers, he'd get over and he could win the sprint against essentially climbers. So that's like, and I was like, are you sure this is what you want to do? Yeah. That's all he wanted to do. So I'm like, okay. So we did that, and it improved. Like he went from being spat out the back to like just making it over. But then on the flat stages, like he got smashed in the sprints because we did lose a bit of the sprint. And then he was all upset with me during the tour because he was like, oh, I can't sprint. And I'm like, but you are climbing these oaks. On the climbing days, this is what you wanted. Like you need to now win against the guys that can sprint out of the climbers. And we like had like a bit of fisticuffs over it. And then the next minute, like he wanted to be a sprinter again. And because there was like a criterium series. So then we focus on that, and he was top 5, top 10 every race, like really, really good stuff. But then he'd go right on the weekends and kind of get shelled on the climbs. And then he was shouting at me because he can't climb anymore. And I was just like, but you need to pick one or the other. That's it. Right?
I had a guy that his top 3 goals, he was going to be state champion in cyclocross, the road race, and crit. And I'm like, okay, so those are 3, like, there's some threads there. It's all cycling, and then he's like, and by the way, I think in the winter, I'm definitely hitting the track. And I was like, dude, all right,
yeah,
we need to get some focus here. But it is, I will say, like, especially in the US racing where, your gravel's huge here now, criteriums, people have this mindset that a crit is just sprinting. And I'm like, if you're sprinting out of every corner, you're in the bad part of the race. Like, even it out. And so don't, someone asked me, like, why do I care about FTP? I'm a crit racer. And I'm like, this is okay. We need to have a deeper conversation about this. Like, this is not, you're not just gonna be doing sprints all day, or you definitely will never win. It's really interesting. What do you see as, is there any type of consistency then in when you're working with professionals? It's their job, they've done this for a really long time, and then your mindset of it's maybe more an education piece to amateurs, and obviously that amateurs, it's a huge pool of experience. Is there anything that's like a really big similarity or a really big difference from those two? It's got to be tough to have both hats on. I mean, you have to
juggle a lot.
Yeah.
The phone rings and you have the one face mask on. The phone rings and you take it off, you put the other one on.
That actually kind of explains it right there.
The ones like with some of the amateurs that I have, if you want to take them being like CEOs of companies and top management and stuff, the way they approach their training is kind of how they've approached work. So super professional at work, super professional on the bike, files are loaded, do the sessions, you get good feedback, pretty much the same as a pro, to be honest. Like there's no real difference. They ask, even today, like pros still ask the same questions. Why am I doing this? Etc. Maybe it's a little bit less because they understood it for so long. But where the biggest difference is not that sort of, it's just your average amateur, even if he is a talented rider, but just the one that isn't that CEO like CFO type of mindset, getting them to kind of understand what you need them to do and why you need them to do it and what you need back from them in order to get, like, you need 100% back so you can give them 100% back. And what I find is that they don't see that. They'll be like, they'll shout at you because they're tired or they had a bad session, or they'll moan at you because, oh, I only did like 4 of the 5, 10 minutes or whatever. And they don't think logically, where you go, okay, what is wrong today? And they're like, no, they're absolutely broken. And you're like, the training's wrong, or like, I can't hit numbers, like I've lost fitness. You're like, well, 2 days ago you did a phenomenal session. You don't lose fitness in 2 days. Like, okay, let's just start with the basics. Okay, like, this isn't Bitcoin. And then what I do is you sit them down and you work backwards, and you go, okay, so did you sleep last night? Did you fight with your wife? Like, has she run off with the pool guy? Like, are your kids naughty? Like, are you not sleeping? Like, work, are there additional stresses? And then when you start working that backwards and you help them understand that, okay, well, 2 days ago, this happened. So the knock-on effect is today, so that's why today wasn't great. We'll chill out tomorrow. And I promise you, on Friday, you'll be good again. And 9 out of 10 times you are. But they seem to go into a huge panic mode, and there's no logical thinking. It's like, oh, I'm useless. Like, this is wrong. Everything's wrong. Like, I'm never racing bikes again. And you just like, we've had one bad day in the last month. It's like, but when they do well, the thing I find is that you never hear from them. It's like, yeah, like, I won the race, and you're like, well done, Brandon, like, awesome. But when you got third and you weren't happy, I got an email this long telling me everything that's wrong because Michael's doing sprints and I had him doing 10 minutes on this day. So, like, I find that there isn't a calm assessment on why we are here where we are today, which I understand. As an athlete, I did similar things, but I was also like 20 years old, so it was very different. Where when you're dealing with an adult, you're like, well, if you were at work, do you explode like this at work when there's a problem, or do you sit down and analyze what's going on and then going forward? So that's kind of my my like biggest gripe, if you want to call it that, in terms of coaching like amateurs and age groupers.
Well, it's actually a really great insight, because now I have about 3 doctors that they're super professional, and it's like, this is what happened. This is how I'm responding. Here's me going forward. Da, 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 da. And then there are some younger athletes or just people that have different personalities that will, especially say they're in week 3, like they're finally buying into the fact of like, okay, you need to push the envelope if you really want to get faster. These are going to be a couple hard weeks of training. They get through it. They crush it, and then it's like a Tuesday, and they're like, I suck. I'm awful. I'm like, dude, whoa, step back. You just hit a PR last week, so that's clearly not suck. And just working it backwards. And my first coach years ago always said, hey, man, doing the workouts is important, but don't forget to take a step back and see the forest from the trees. Like, look at the big picture. And that was him telling me that was such an amazing, just helpful insight to relate to myself, to relate to athletes. It's one reason why I still have a coach. We're all in there. We're all like banging out these workouts, and it's like, okay, help me see what I'm not seeing, because I feel I'm having a crappy day. And sometimes it's just a crappy day.
That's it. And like like I sound like I came across there, but like, I'm not. It's just more like, I'll take all the time and I'll sit and I'll explain to them, like, it's actually good. There's nothing wrong. Or like, if there is something wrong, you go, okay, well, this is wrong, and you assess it. But, what I find is that overreaction is really extreme on how they kind of like, I'm useless, and you just like, it's impossible. It's physically impossible. Just calm down and let's have a think here.
And that is interesting too, when it's the point of like, it's either they have the internalized I'm useless, or the external, this plan sucks. And it's like, dude,
that's it.
Okay. You crushed it last week. So I don't know, it might not suck. Might just, that's it. That's a really good segue. You had made an awesome quote that I think was in the other, I can't remember who the podcast host was, but you were talking about an athlete comes in, he's feeling bad on like a race day. You can't change that. But what you can do is take where he's at and say, well, we're going to have a good mental day. Maybe it's not going to be a physical one, but like, your mindset matters. How important do you see mindset and watts? And like, they obviously go together. how important is mindset in a sport like cycling, or even from your history of motocross? Where does that
Yeah,
play in?
like it's something I really do believe in. Like back in South Africa or back home, and that my reputation is a like hard in the flip up coach, or people leave. It's which isn't entirely true, but it's that age old thing is that in any endurance sport, if you can suffer longer, you'll go better than the guy that doesn't. So it's not always about pushing the best numbers or having the strongest FTP or peak power. It's like, and I only rode like Cat 1 and stuff back in South Africa when I did, but like I wasn't the best. But I knew that if I suffered to that lamppost on the climb and the other guy didn't, I'd get to the top first, like
Yes.
essentially. And and that was it. And you also got to box clever. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, if you go in to anything scared, you've already lost.
Hmm.
Like you've got to have confidence in yourself. And if you don't have that confidence, whether that confidence is only good enough for 10th or 20th, that's fine. But rather go in 100% confidence and come 20th or 10th than go in second guessing yourself, your ability, everything, and get 12th. To me,
Hmm.
that's a failure. And
Yeah.
and people can say what they want, but it's like the reason you race and stuff is because you enjoy the suffering. That's what it is. Like whether you've admitted it or acknowledged it, but that is why people enjoy it. It's that adrenaline rush, and you take away the suffering, and you've taken away like a lot of the enjoyment. As weird as that sounds, like whether you know that or not, but like people love suffering, and you feel alive when you suffer. So kind of embrace that, and you can actually go better. But it's more about confidence. It's like you need to go in confident. If you don't go in confident, don't go. That's my theory.
I think it's huge for people to hear someone in your shoes say that it's not always this. Everyone's obsessed with the watts per kg chart. What's my peak number? And we're about to post one with Robin Carpenter, who's like, yeah,
Yeah,
my big numbers, they're not crazy. It's just I can do them later in a race, and I'm crafty, and like I use my brain a
100%.
lot. And so you have these athletes that's like, okay, I hit 300 watts. I hit 300 watts. I was at 298, so I sucked. So I stopped and went home. And I'm like, no, like you did
Yeah,
those first
correct.
two to get to the third one. And like
Yeah, yeah,
and they
that's
just
it.
hate that aspect of I'm not crushing it. I'm over.
Yeah,
And I get it that we're just in this metric, hyper focused area of cycling right now. What's my FTP? What's my VO2 and like those non they're not sexy measurable numbers, and measuring your
no,
repeatability is incredibly hard to do, but it's like those are the sessions where you're really making changes in your body that's going to replicate what it's like in a bike race. I don't know a
yeah,
bike race
sure.
where you do this one-off 5-minute effort and go home, whereas
Yeah,
you
that's
go
it.
ride
Yeah,
and put 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 kjs in your
yeah.
legs and then try and go hard. So that's awesome. Do pros lack, you had mentioned they will ask questions about their training if they don't understand. Like, is their mindset different, or do they ever come in and be like, dude, I don't feel prepared for this? Or are they, they're human after all. Does that change? I mean, the confidence level, or maybe it's like the world championships and it's a huge race or a tour and that's when it changes. Do you see them and you're like, wow, this guy's actually human?
Yeah, very much. And that's what people don't understand. Also, like, it's kind of it's a really good question, because I try explain it all the time. Like people say to me, like, oh, what's it like being around, so and so rider, or like, what's it like being around this guy? And you just like, he's a normal O. He just rides a bike really fast. Like nothing else different. Like nothing else is different. Like he plays PlayStation on the camp, or like he goes hiking. It's
uh,
like there's no, he's just a really fast, good bike rider. Like there's nothing different when you get to know them. Like sure, some are grumpy, some are funny, some are not, but it's like that they are no different. So their personalities, when you say like, do they go to a race and some of them, aren't confident? Like, yeah, some do 100%, but it's their job. So they
Right.
go anyway. They have to go. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, do you not go to work on Monday because you're not really confident to hand in a piece of paper or to sit in a meeting? It's exactly the same thing. It's so if their form isn't exactly where it's meant to be and they got a really big race or a hard race coming up, they like, oh, this is going to hurt. So like,
Mm-hmm.
there's not a massive 100% confidence factor. But again, it's their job and my job and the team's job or whoever it is for them to be 100% at certain races. So you make sure of it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's no different. They really are normal human beings, and people kind of forget that a lot. And I'll be admitted, like I was one of the first people to do that as well. But they're just normal people.
Yeah. That's what do you see as, there are some athletes that they're training, and especially if you look at like this, the executives, CEOs, whatever, they're training simply for this event and they're not really interested in the process of training. Do you see more pros? Are they more interested in the process of training because cycling's kind of been their whole life? Or is that same thing? Half are in it to just win this bike race, and the other half are in it to, they just love riding a bike and that's why they ride 20 hours a week.
They definitely all love riding their bike. There's
Mhm.
absolutely no doubt on that. In terms of how engaged they are in their training, some you just give them what they mean to do Monday to Sunday, and they'll go bash it out. Like, they may ask a little bit of a question here and there, but theoretically they'll just go do their thing and it's great and you'll get the good feedback. And then there are others where they'll say to you like, hey, I'm doing this today, or hey, I see we're doing this over the next period. Why are we doing this? So it's a little
Mhm.
bit of a twofold. I've got some that are super engaging, and then I've got some which just go do whatever I tell them to do. So
Mhm.
a little bit of both, and you get that in amateurs as well. So you have guys that are super invested in what they do, and then the others that just go bang out the sessions and are happy to go to trust, kind of aren't really interested,
Mhm.
and they give you
Yeah.
feedback on that session.
With these guys riding so much and share only however much you feel like sharing, is it what are they only going hard that if they're just before races are starting, or maybe even comment on when it is during race season and they're racing 2 times a week or every other weekend or whatever it might be, are they only going hard a couple times during the week and the rest is just riding the endurance, low tempo base miles? Or how do they, and maybe it's just too varied based on the athlete. What's is there any like general thing for
um
someone riding 25 hours a week?
yeah, so like if we take a team that goes to a classics campaign for 4 weeks
Sure.
as an example, they may race minimum 2, maybe 3 classics a week, or every second week, 2 and 3, 2 and 3, or however it is. But
Mm-hmm.
say they're away for 4 weeks. Typically, all their work is done by the time they go to that classics campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So, what they'll do during the classics is obviously race, they'll recover, they'll do recons, etc. But depending on where they spaced out, so if you race a Wednesday and you race a Sunday, so if you
Mm-hmm.
do Gent Wevelgem and then you do Roubaix, you'll typically have like a recovery day after the race. Then you'll go probably recon some of the sectors at Roubaix, just
Mm-hmm.
as an example. And then in between that, depending on how they feel, they may do some efforts on one of the days, and they'll probably do like another 5 hour day somewhere in between that, or
Okay.
the recon day doing, four or five sectors, maybe 5 hours. So yeah, it really just de- depends where and how, but it'll be like typical training, put it that way, going
Mm-hmm.
forward, just depending on what they're doing.
Okay. That's
It's
cool.
kind of like train race recover, train race recover.
Yeah. And then does that change before they head out? So if they have like a 4 week period or 8 weeks when they're not racing, is that more structured every day? Or is it still some like, hey, just go ride, get these hours, and at some
No,
point hit these
it'll
other?
be structured. Yeah,
Okay,
it'll be structured and monitored and everything like that.
cool. What do you think that is a small thing that might have a big impact in amateurs that you see? One thing that I always see is somebody comes to me and we're talking about their training. I'm like, hey, have you ever looked at your endurance rides? They're like, yeah, they're so easy. I'm like, well, you're coasting 40% of the time. That's like my big, like little
Yeah.
thing. Do you see anything that come up that you're like, dude, just change this and you'll probably see a bigger change down the road?
Rest.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
The only time you adapt to any training load is when you rest. So an example I use is if you hit your head against a wall, like essentially it's going to cut open and bleed. So like that's like a training block you've done. So your body's now bleeding. The only time it heals or it's like has a scab is if you stop hitting your head. So if you stop hitting your head, essentially you're resting or recovering, and then your body heals, and then you have like a scar or big scar tissue, and that essentially is your body going, I can't afford for this to happen again. So if it does, I need to be stronger. So that's when your body, when you train and essentially you're doing this training, you recover and your body comes back stronger because it goes, I'm going to have this stress over here again. I need to be prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
But people, typically amateurs and stuff, and even pro athletes in general, actually, is they still on the vibe is that more is better and rest is evil. But the only time you ever rest, ever recover or adapt to a training or a racing load and come back strong is if you rest. And that's, yeah, and it's like when you fight with people and then they do rest and they come back and they're like, oh, like I'm a Hulk. And you're like, they're like, oh, I'm so good. The training's been good. I'm like, no, because you had like 4 easy days. Like you had a rest. It's, but yeah, that's my biggest thing is rest. When you look at what people do, is it's always more is better, and it's actually the opposite. Like when they have a bad race, they'll train harder the next week, and then they'll have another one because they're just further fatigued or further overreached, and then they'll have even another one. Like I remember in the motocross days was where I learned it, and another guy back in South Africa I'm close with, we joke about it all the time, is after a national, someone goes really bad, and Monday they just big on the grind again, or like, they race Sunday, had a bad race Sunday on like had a crit. Tuesday, they already like simulating another crit. And you just like, again, like go backwards, like just see why. And often rest is better than more. And that's my one, my like kind of holy grail on go-to stuff for amateurs is actually the worst you go, rest, and it'll turn around.
I'm gonna have to like put a disclaimer that I'm not paying you to say that, because I have people that are like, dude,
yeah.
Oh man, the comment that I get from a lot of people is, man, you make me go, when you say go hard, we go way harder than I've ever gone in a training session, but then you make me rest way too much. And I was like, that's the key right there.
That's
like,
spot on though. That's gold.
Yeah.
That's gold.
And it's it was my first coach, Jason Hillamar. I keep giving him shout outs, but he was he worked with Frank Overton and Fast Cat in Boulder, Colorado, and really helped me understand like pushing the envelope and recovering. And he would, I'd have days when I'd say, hey man, like my ego was like, I've only done Cat 1 stuff in the US. And so I'd be like, hey, there's this local training race. Can I go do that? And he's like, well, do you want to win the training race or do you want to win on the weekend? Like you really need to do this session and then you need to rest and come. And then I'd do well in the race. I'm like, dude, thank you for telling me not to go do that. Cause I needed, it's very funny. I think that the rest is just, but coach, my CTL is going down. It's not going to go up when you're resting, but that's not like,
but
just that metric.
Like, but that's also like a metric. It kills me to death. It's an important variable, but it's not the holy grail.
Yeah.
Because typically, like you get to a point where if this is CTL and this is TSP, you do this. Like, I mean, you drop off the face of the earth, and like, it's just like, you have to be at like 120 to do this race. You're like, no, bud, like, not for like an average 9-to-5er. Like if you're at 120, you're close to probably anemia, or your threshold values are wrong, or like, I don't know what you've done, but it's, like that's, and just because your CTL goes down, like almost amen that it actually does go down, that it means that your fitness is actually going up. Like if you have balanced training right, your CTL goes down during a taper, but your foreman is going up, like you adapting to a training load, like you kind of like you've plugged into the electricity socket and you're absorbing an energy. It's like it's not the other way around. It's like, and that's what people it grinds me. It's a topic that really kind of gets to me.
I can tell you're passionate about it.
Yeah, but it's like, and also like, because it's, and we use Training Peaks, so like phenomenal tool. I use WKO5. I use all their stuff. But again, it's data driven. So what you give it is how it reacts. It doesn't tell you from an external component how you are on that day. Like it could give you a +5 TSB, 90 CTL, which theoretically could be a peak for you. And you can't even accelerate away from the robot at the traffic lights because you're so cooked from your kids running around, your wife running off with the pool guy, blah, blah, blah. And there's all that external stresses. So unless you monitor and track external stress factors and variables, like you might as well not even look at a PMC chart. It's like you need the two to correlate. And it's like,
my numbers say I'm good, but I slept 3 hours last night. It's like, dude, come on. That's common sense. You're exhausted. Go to bed. Stop trying to do this VO2 max workout.
It's like, yeah, it's just like important, not the holy grail, like, yeah, there's a lot more to it than just having a high CTL.
Awesome. What's, from a nutrition standpoint, anything that's interesting that you've come across, maybe even in working with your one business or with the UAE guys? It seems like the evolution, we're constantly learning new things. Initially it was you can absorb 60 grams of carbs. Now it's 90. Now it might be 120, da, 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 da. What do you see maybe there's like old school, like people doing old school stuff, or anything that you come across that's interesting that people might just find interesting from the UAE side of things, or even from your other business?
If just as a general rule, if you've gone from, which is typically 60, maybe 70 grams of what people used to take or normally take, to 120, you'll need to take a packet between your legs because your stomach will really go to hell. Like you need to kind of train your gut for that. But typically you're looking at like 80 to 100 grams for would be correct intake of carbs. And something that, from obviously it is implemented on the team, but also what we had been doing for athletes back home, if you want to call it, like our normal athletes, even though we do have elites and pros there, is to periodize your nutrition according to your training program. So it's not always the easiest thing. Often you do need a pretty sharp nutritionist, or you need to be a little bit up to date on what you do. But you can't, as an example, eat X amount for the same sessions, same period of the year, same race days, etc. So that's one thing that like in terms of what you eat has pretty much stayed the same. Like you're eating rice, you're eating chicken, fish, meat, etc. However, to periodize your nutritional intake is now what is key, and obviously having sort of 80 to 100 grams of carbs per hour, if you can kind of train yourself up to that, and that's a very sustainable nutritional model, if you want to say that.
Awesome. Are there any interesting like pre-race routines that you've seen? You don't have to name them by name, but that is just very unique or something different?
So guy, like if you take kind of really random things, there's a guy that always puts his one sock on, like, so he'll go left sock, right sock, but he'll go right shoe, left shoe, just for it kills me watching him do it. Like for me, I'm just like, I've got to walk away. And then there's like, on like good days or like motivating days, it's the same songs and stuff, but it's not like, guys aren't doing handstands and radical things like that, but it's just, if you win with a certain pair of shoes, like, guys often have kind of a few pairs of shoes. So if they win on a certain pair of shoes, they'll keep wearing that shoe if it's during a tour or if they can, and stuff like that. So nothing really radical, but just kind of one or two small quirks.
So that's interesting. So would it be the same model of shoe, or are they changing between models of shoes because of a sponsor? Or I've always wondered that, like, they're getting so much new stuff all the time. sometimes it's like you like something that's broken in. Do you just get used to that, you think?
Yeah, so like, in terms of changing like shoes, so say they sponsored by the city, as an
Hmm.
example, is, you may get your normal city, and then you may get a city with regards to, like an aero or a light one, on a very hot day. So they may change in between that.
Okay.
But in terms of, majority of them all have shoe sponsors. So it's not like they're going to wear City today and then they
Mm.
ride DMT tomorrow and Spez the
Hmm.
following day. So they may just change that model of shoe, from like maybe a summer or winter or color shoe, whatever. But, cleats will always be the same, as an example, and the shoe will always be the same. If they have custom soles, it'll always be the same custom sole, etc. in their shoes.
Okay. What's what do you think are some soft skills that you've seen your athletes or the UAE guys try to work on or hone that's brought them success in a race? So not necessarily watts or the actual physical stuff. We've kind of talked about mindset, and maybe it's things like meditation, or is there anything that's really like an athlete could look at another way to approach their training and racing besides just the power that they put out?
Um, yeah, going back to that mental side, that it is important. Some riders do work with like sports psychologists.
Mm.
Some don't.
Mhm.
Some kind of do meditate and just kind of really stay calm and just focus on the job at hand. So I wouldn't say there's like a new or a holy grail of something that's working. It's more just, like a lot of them at the end of the day are very confident in their ability. So 8 out of 10 of them are fine to rock up at the race, do their training, make sure everything is good, strength conditioning, rehabilitation, then nutrition, etc., and go race their bikes. Where some kind of, do have a few, I would say, quirks or a little bit of an insecurity, and they do work on that in terms of, some mental homework, or with a sports psychologist, or even a sporting director, or even with me as a coach. We may go over some certain stuff and just kind of pep talk it, if you want to say
Mhm.
that.
Mhm. How important when they're all, and I mean, I guess this kind of applies to Cat 1 2s where, I've made a comment before that like a Cat 5 race is really a fitness contest. Somebody usually rides away. With Cat 1 2s, everyone's much closer. Pros, probably even much closer. How important is that homework piece to these races of knowing the turns, knowing, there's this incline and then we turn and da 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 da. Is that much more involved at the UAE level versus what you see with amateurs doing
Yeah, significantly.
significantly?
Yeah, it's
Almost
important.
to like where you see football players watching film and tape and just
Yeah.
going as deep as possible.
Yeah, 100. So like for that, as a on an important tour stage, as an example, if we haven't recon that, you've done, like, you've done all the homework on it, so
Hmm.
you'll know that at this kilometer on the climb, there's A, B, or C, or there's this section where there could be a very strong crosswind. Yeah, like a look at every team does it, but I just can't go into significant detail in
Yeah,
terms
yeah,
of
yeah.
what we do. But
Sure.
yeah, those stages are known straight up. Simple
No,
as
I'm definitely I'm
that.
trying to be delicate without being that guy that's like, tell me
Yeah.
secrets.
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, as I said, every team does it, so it's not like we are any
Right, right.
special.
Yeah.
But in saying that, the riders and sporting directors will have full knowledge of everything, of what's going on. Put
Got
it
it.
that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I got two last questions for you, and I'll let you go. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you doing this. Is there anything that you've seen? Kind of, we've touched on nutrition. Anything that's evolving with cycling that you have to adapt to as a coach, and whether it is like all of a sudden more people are getting WKO5, and now you're, kind of got to help people understand what they need to understand, or nutrition is kind of changing, or is there anything that you see sort of getting more involved in the sport? If I'm making sense with that question.
Um, yeah, like, from my side, I try to keep basics. Like, so, just as you said with WKO5, you can get so lost in translation there in terms of their graphs and stuff. My landing page is 6 graphs only, like very, very, very basic graphs. And then in terms of the analysis and that, I do have some external software, but again, I really only analyze off like probably 3-4 graphs. So from that side, what I like to do, or what I try and do, is stay up to date with science personally. Like if whether it's physiology in terms of going from 60 to 100 grams of carbs to 120, which is now being introduced, it's like, why are we doing this? Like, are we up to date with it? Is it good? Is there, is it validated? Can we use this? If we can't, then no. So from my side, I really try to stay up to date in terms of updated science. That's pretty much it in terms of physiology, if you want to call it that. And what my training sessions then are sort of based around is possibly enhancing that energy system better than the sessions I had before. Like if 4x8 is better than 3x10, I'll rather implement 4x8. Just as a training session, stuff like that. So that's where I try find out the latest stuff from the nutrition guy. I try find out the latest physiology from our doctors and our sports physiologists and stuff, and then I try kind of absorb all of that and take it all, and then extract a little bit of what I think is good, and I apply that to my trade, and that's how I do it.
That's awesome, because when you said, why would we use this? Like, there's so much that you can get lost in. I'm thinking now, I just have on the dashboard, one thing just says favorites, and like it has my basic bullet points. And I think applicable that people can hear, like, why are you doing this in your training? And then also the basic thing for a lot of people in a race is like, why are you pedaling? Why are you expending energy? Why are you doing something in a race? Know what you're doing. Be forward thinking. I think that's a good tip for people that they can apply to their training and racing. So then I guess if you had, my last question be like, if you had to teach a class on like being a better cyclist, what pops into your mind? Maybe, we've talked about rest, maybe not only what should people do, what are people missing, sort of as a parting words for all of us that are listening that they can take away.
Learn to go as fast as you can for the least amount of effort. That's what cycling is. Simple as that. If you can go as faster than someone for the least amount for less effort, you're going to go faster for longer and you'll win. Like that. Whether, as I said, whether winning is coming 10th or 30th, it doesn't matter. But that's really what it is. And the other thing that I always try to tell people, which once they do accept that and they understand it, is that cycling is about a whole lot of work for a very little reward, over a very long time, so someone who I really, really look up to as a phenomenal doctor and physiologist and stuff. And he had said to me that it takes 3 years for someone on a proper training program for someone to hit sort of like a physiological peak. And he had said that, after 3 years, you'll win a race. And literally on the day that happened. And I'd sort of kept on. It was something that really stayed with me. And you always have people, and I've implemented that, and it's come to fruition with many athletes. But people always want now, like in today's terms, like we logged on Zoom, boom, you were here. Before I'd send you a letter, and it would take a week. So the expectation is different. But cycling is really so much work for such a little reward. And people go, like my threshold's 4 watts a kilo. I want to be 5 in 6 months. And you're just like, I'm not Harry Potter, bud. Like, it's, like you start looking for like 2%, and you like a year is what you start looking at, or maybe 3% a year, or like in some radical cases, 5%. But, 5% is 300 or 315 for 20 minutes. Like that's a whole new world of horrible.
Yeah.
15 watts. So, that I just try to tell people, like, trust if you're working with a coach or whatever, or if you've downloaded a program, just trust it, but understand that it's a lot of work for a little amount of reward. And once you've accepted that and you enjoy it, you'll actually progress quicker. That's it.
Oh man, it's huge for you to say that. That's like the outtake clip, because there's a guy in the US, the podcast Fast Labs, Trevor Connor is one of the coaches there, and I reach out to people that are just farther down the line than I am in coaching and everything, sort of as mentors. And I've been talking to him for a while, and he's like, listen, Brendan, like, I tell athletes straight up, give me 2 years. Like, if you're into this, I need 2 years. A lot of this is a year getting rid of the BS stuff. And then we can start building on what you've got. And then we got to go farther than that. And it is, it's tough for people to understand that in this, you said it, in the now economy. A guy said to me, I want to win a race like you won a race. And I said, hey man, just go on Strava and see how many miles I've ridden in a lifetime versus how many you've ridden. And he's like, damn, you've ridden 130,000 miles. I'm like, dude, and I started where you were. And you just learn. And don't forget, half of this is watts, half is understanding bike racing. Like, it's not just who can pedal the hardest. So man, this was really awesome, John. I appreciate you taking the time to sit down and do this.
Anytime, man.
And hopefully, so you're in Abu Dhabi now. Where do you guys head next?
We're in Al Ain, Alain.
Okay,
which is basically like it's 150 k's in like to the left of Abu Dhabi. At the bottom of, we're actually very close to the Jebel Hafid climb that they do in UAE tour.
Okay.
So from here, we leave Thursday, if I'm correct, the 22nd. Some guys go to an altitude camp, like a group of sort of 8 guys go altitude camp. And then some other guys, literally, we start racing. They kind of go home, shave their legs and head off to races. So it's kind of all systems go at the moment. Our first races are like we have Valenciana, we have Algarve, Provence. Really, like I must say, like I'm excited for the year. Like last year was good, although we did 12 months in 3 months. It was a bit rough.
Crazy.
It was. I was away in 90 days. I was home for 10 days, and it wasn't at one given time. Like but again, we were told that the team was amazing when everyone was in lockdown, and they just said, hey guys, when we go racing, just prepare to go racing. So for me, it was, or for everyone, it was tough, but the during lockdown, our team management and that really, and I'm not just blowing horns here, were phenomenally good to us as staff and riders. And for me, it wasn't an argument what I was going to go do. It was like, okay, cool, pack your bags and go. So now it's a lot better. It's spread out, which is great. My calendar essentially is built around the Tour de France. I sort of follow that group of riders in that, and then accumulates at the tour. And then, I'm excited to get going.
That's cool.
I really love bike racing.
You still look super fit, so they still let you ride a bike some days, it looks like.
Yeah, they do. But I go ride with Alan Piper, and he smashes me, man. Like, he left me for dead on Jebel Hafid. And like at the beginning, I was like dropping him, and I was like, yo, man, like, I'm going to show you what's going on. And then like he just came past me, but poof, and I was like, come on. No, he's phenomenal, that guy. Like, he's like 100 years old, and he's just got the energy of an Energizer bunny.
That's incredible. And I forgot to ask you, I'll post this earlier on. What's the website for the amateur company if people want to go online?
www and then science, 2 being TO sport.com. I'll WhatsApp it to you, but science2sport.com.
Cool. Dude, thanks so much, man. This was awesome.
Pleasure. Sorry about my lighting here, but all good.
It's all good. Have a good rest of the day.
Likewise. Cheers, buddy.
See you later. Bye-bye.